The so-called fire season is starting increasingly early. Fires are more intense. They spread through huge areas and become out of control, destroying lives and goods. Areas of Mediterranean-type climate are among those where these occurrences have been most notorious. Figures from Portugal stand out among southern European countries. Scientists working in ecology and forestry explain those fires as a result of land use modifications and climate change. Here the focus falls on literary uses of fire in the wake of the FIREUSES research project, which envisages fire as a field of historical inquiry, in line with earlier work by Stephen J. Hine, Christian Kull, Simon Pulley, among others. In line with the topic of this conference, we surveyed contemporary Portuguese literature to search for literary burning landscapes. The content of these literary burning landscapes includes the symbolic use of fires, memories of daily life, and of particular occurrences. Fictitious elements are depicted in combination with facts. Literature as a research material is no longer a new feature in social and environmental history. It is recognized as a repository of rural memories and a product of the historical, political and social context in which it is produced. The historian Dominic Lacapra highlighted its ability to convey the feel for life in the past. These rural histories inevitably lead to hybrid socio-ecological realities that have blossomed in the mind of a writer. They may display the multiple uses of fire and their consequences to social and ecological domains. They may reveal the origins, the agents, the practices or the impacts of fire in a landscape context. We call them pyrostories and define them as sections of literary texts such as short stories, novels and chronicles that explicitly include fires that take place in rural landscapes. The corpus came up from Lightscape, PT, a database of modern and contemporary literary representations of landscapes in mainland Portugal, by selecting pyrostories from the 20th and 21st century. It results in an extensive and illustrative set of 55 excerpts, collected from 43 works by 29 writers. In this presentation we address the following research questions. How are fires portrayed in Portuguese literature? What ideas do they use to describe them, and how is fire built into narratives? How does the literary fires relate to the surrounding landscape and social life? A content analysis grid was set out. Categories were informed by a first reading. 3 macro categories, A, B and C, each subdivided into categories, in black, 18 in total, and their disaggregation into several subcategories, in yellow, 59 in total, identified by acronyms. An example of subcategories is illustrated in slide by A_friend and A_FOE. A_friend is attributed to stories in which a fire is described as good, beautiful, allure or regenerative. A_FOE, on the contrary, is attributed to stories in which a fire is described as bad, fearful, dangerous, harmful or destructive. Surprisingly or not, we found that these two subcategories are not mutually exclusive. This grid allowed each pyrostory to be analyzed, classified and coded by matching the information about the occurrence of the fire, conveyed by each sentence with the respective hierarchical system of categories in the grid. This transposition of the different excerpts into standardized categories, the units of content analysis, allowed a quantitative analysis of the corpus carried out later. Just to illustrate the process, we show here how we classified pyrostories, from the textual form, here in the original language, into categories and subcategories. As you see, for this first example, we found macro categories A and C and the subcategories weather_wind, time_on, and adjectivation_FOE in these two short pieces of text by the writer Virgilio Ferreira. A bit more complex process is illustrated in a second example. We found A, B, and C macro categories in a total of 7 categories and 8 subcategories, including arson,
conflict and friendly fire, among others.
Even though we can find that Pyrostories cover a time span of 12 decades, considering the date of the work's first publication, writings from the middle 20th century, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, are overrepresented in the corpus, as well as at Lightscape database itself. For this reason, some literary movements that emerged in the course of this period are more represented than others. That is the case of neorealism and social realism. Other authors, before and after them, are relevant names of contemporary Portuguese literature.
Literary Landscape Database registers the geolocation of each literary excerpt according to the NUTS-3 system for the territory of mainland Portugal. For the 55 Pyrostories, a non-homogeneous distribution is obvious. First and foremost, Pyrostories are less prevalent in coastal areas than in inland territorial units. Two geographical clusters also stand out. Cluster 1 in northeastern country with 24 Pyrostories. Cluster 2 in southeastern country with 19 Pyrostories. We found variations at the subcategory level in the two clusters identified in the map that will appear in the next slides. Two examples can already be highlighted. Morphology, which means landforms, influences and shapes the weather, biodiversity, agricultural production, and economic activity. The mountains stand out, with a total of 22 Pyrostories associated to this feature. Nevertheless, the prevalence of mountains differs between Cluster 1 in the northern hilly region and Cluster 2 in the southern flatplain region. This result corresponds to the expression of the geomorphologic diversity in mainland Portugal, also depicted in literary geographies. In terms of sociability, conflict is present in 19 of 55 Pyrostories, obviously reflecting the common literary use of fire to convey drama and discord, but also the actual use of fire as an instrument of protest and sabotage. Of those 19 Pyrostories where conflict is present, 16 correspond to the two clusters identified above, a fact which seems to associate this feature almost directly with these two regions.
We can go into further detail addressing stages of firing. In chemical terms, ignition designates the appearance of the first flame after providing the required activation energy to initiate combustion. The category ignition refers to the causes, agents, and contexts involved in the onset of a fire. Look at the table. Only 2 prescribed fires and 2 fires caused by lightning are mentioned. We studied the 4 prevalent subcategories of ignition and their relationship to 8 subcategories of analysis. We found differences among the 4 radar graphs by their diverse polygonal configurations. The highest values associated with each of the ignition types are depicted by spikes or projections detached from the contour. Among the cases of known ignition, arson stands out in 17 Pyrostories, the highest value among the causes identified. Spikes stand out on S_conflict and A_friend. This clearly highlights the role of fire in a contemporary history of popular dissent towards state forestation policies in the northern hinterland and a peasant struggle for labor rights against latifundia owners in the southern interior. 8 accidental fires are linked to negligence, mental disorder, and to the use of technological devices, such as sparks released by steam engines. A spike stands out on A_FO. It also points to the significance of these circumstances to a general history of fire in Portugal, in which arson stands out, and to possible political and social motives historically associated with it. In 19 Pyrostories, either the type of ignition is not mentioned or else its origin is referred to as unknown. A spike stands out on subjectivation_scenery, which corresponds to fires remaining at the periphery of the main argument of the text. The use of fire as a tool for managing the land is mentioned in 14 Pyrostories. Spikes stand out on S_summer, the hottest and driest season, often on overgrazed land, in anticipation of the return of the autumn rains, and the pair A_friend and A_FO perhaps depends on the capacity of keeping burnings under control.
What are the historical events, confirmed by other sources, in which the literary narrative brings the fire into action? Writers describe the ways in which the fire moves and how it burns. These descriptions are more frequent in the stories taking place in mountain areas, Cluster 1, than in
the flat plains of the southern regions, Cluster 2, where the homogeneous topography does not promote the same expression of fire in terms of speed and intensity as in the mountain and slope areas. Seasonal references are not always made, 42%, but, when it does appear, summer fires are prevalent, for both clusters. All types of land cover burn, however the agricultural and forestry histories are expressed in the type of the vegetation consumed by the fire is pyrostories taking place in cluster 1 and 2. References to farmlands and orchards, L_Asia, are more frequent in pyrostories taking place in the flat plains, cluster 2, which agrees with what was noted in the previous slide about fires being more associated with land management in cluster 2. On the contrary, woodlands or plantations of pines, chestnuts, oaks, eucalyptus burn more often in pyrostories taking place in cluster 1, the mountain areas, that have also been the regions where the forestation policies were enacted between 1930 and 1960. Again, differences in the composition of the landscapes are revealed in the ways narratives about fire are incorporated into fiction. Actors may also be called characters in narrative. A_locals are prevalent in the two clusters, as agents in ignition and/or involved in fighting flames. Firefighters had a residual presence in literary suppression efforts. Fire as a scenery, meaning the description of the background, local conditions where the action took place, is mainly connected, as it will be shown in the next slide, to situations in which the representation of fire is that of a memory of past fire. Fire is also navigated as a character assumes human behavior and moral values in the category personification, or as a character assumes animal, plants, or geological characteristics, in the category NO and human. The low frequency of these categories make any extrapolation to the differences found between the two clusters a bit adventurous, particularly to the NO and human. Yet, one could extrapolate that fire finds its way through the human figure more often in cluster 2, in the flat plains, than in cluster 1, the mountains, and more often through non-human figures in cluster 1, than in cluster 2. This difference might be due to the place where social conflict, which is well connected to fire, is placed. If in the flat plains, in the south, social conflict takes place in the farmlands and through oppressive forms of exploitation established between people, therefore the human domain is the center of the action. In the mountain ranges, in the north, conflict is staged through the access to the mountains in a tension between pasture land and compulsory afforestation. Therefore social conflict is crossed by the non-human world at the interface where multiple animals and geologies meet. This possibility of analysis will be more explored in the future with more detailed insights. Fire can be described as a friend and a companion of rage and struggle, or as a foe that destroys harvests and lives. Given the complexity of the social realities in which these fires are used, they can also appear combined, in other words, being both a friend and foe. This combination makes it hard to read this category through the lenses of frequencies and, as expected, there does not seem to exist very evident differences between clusters.
The results concerning the category time of representation reveal that no relevant differences are found between the total of the corpus and each of the two clusters. The discourse about fire risk and the expression of feelings by anticipation of a burning event T_before or the evocation of an imagined fire T_imag is less prevalent than the description of a fire that is happening in the present of the narrative T_on or the remembrance of a fire occurred in the past T_after. In other words, the focus lay either on fires that are taking place at the time of the narrative or on fires that already took place. Therefore, fire appears either as an active agent taking role in the literary present, or as an element of the past that brought novelty into the landscape and/or social life. Fire is not understood as a future threat determining the action, but as the action itself. When fire is taking place in the present of the narrative, it is mainly portrayed as foe, and it is frequently described to break out at night and to exist in relation to local actors involved in conflicting situations. A similar relation is identified when the fire is described in the past. However, in the descriptions of a fire that already took place, the category scenery, meaning the background, local conditions where the action took place becomes important. This suggests that the fire, once gone and suppressed, is used as a literary resource to reconstruct the biophysical, environmental, social, political contexts, or, in other words, to rebuild a particular landscape in a post-fire stage of the narrative. The low frequency of the category illusion, meaning what can be a fire or seem like a fire, presented in the previous slide, and of the subcategories T_imag, meaning burning wishes or an imagined fire, and T_before, meaning preconditions to burn, seem to indicate that fire figures in literature as an element of reality and not as an imagined or yet-to-happen scene.
In literature, fire always performs a narrative function through a reference to an event or circumstance that deserves to be highlighted, regardless of whether it is frequent or sporadic in the scenario of the story. Fires are seldom presented as major features or persistent contexts. Instead, fires appear, produce effects, carry meanings, change the course of the argument, and then vanish as they burn. Fire displays an aesthetic function as well, as a set of sensory dimensions are called upon to describe it: visual, auditory, olfactive, and haptic. They refer to colors and glows. The smell announces the arrival of fire or persists after its passage. The sound of flames violently consuming the vegetation or a later crackling of the aftermath are also part of the moment. Fire is a blazing ember, and the sensation of heat is also occasionally present in the descriptions. The literary fire conveys a set of strong emotions, and its imaginary resorts to the symbolism associated to fires and their uses: passion and desire, rebirth and resurrection, eternity, destruction, hope, hell, and purification, generating attraction or fear, or both, in a natural ambivalence. Fire is incorporated in literature as a subject and an active character that influences the narrative in episodes that are told in the present of the narrative or in the past. Fire in literature is informed by differences in the biophysical structure and land cover of the Portuguese landscapes, as it was revealed by the behavior of fire and the vegetation burnt in mountain ranges in the north and in flat plain areas in the south. These reinforce the importance and legitimacy of literature as a lens to understand past fire realities and the ways in which fires were once understood. It doesn't convey the contemporary state of alert about the fire threats, which is a relevant finding for revisiting concerns that climate change brought to people by the current fires in the landscape. Fire in literature is included in social relations as elements of disruption that aimed at resolving or transforming a certain status quo. They are incorporated into the description of the landscape to rebuild post-fire sceneries. It highlights the role of fire in a contemporary history of popular dissent towards state forestation policies in the northern hinterland and of peasant struggle for labor rights against latifundia owners in the southern interior. Finally, it suggests the significance of these circumstances to a general history of fire in Portugal, in which arson stands out, and the possible political and social motives historically associated with it. Thank you.